car, Dad warned. Don't run off. And, of course, the proverbial kid's answer is, we won't. So Mom and Dad spread out the checkered blanket, started setting out sandwiches and chips. Mark stretched out the Kingston's legs and back. It was December, and even though it was winter back home in South Africa, it was summer. Air was hot and humid, beads of sweat trickled down his neck. But he still wanted to play soccer no matter how hot it is. Come on, James yelled, stopping a few yards away. Bet you can't make a goal. So Mark kicked the ball to James. It rolled through the grass. James turned and dashed after it. They kicked the ball back and forth. James, terrible aim. Ball went spinning off in weird, random directions. Every time Mark went after the ball, he wandered farther away from the car. The grass got deeper. It got thicker. Hard to walk through. Difficult to kick the ball. Just ahead of him, the grass was taller than he was. Kick higher, Mark called. I'm trying, James yelled back. He kicked the ball hard. It bounced past Mark, right into the clump of tall yellow grass. Mark started to jog toward the grass. Suddenly, Mark! The voice was so loud it sounded like an explosion. Run! Now! Mark was so shocked, he did exactly what the voice demanded. Fear shot through him. Heart hammering against his ribs, he turned, raced toward the car. James must have glimpsed the terrified expression because, well, he ran too, didn't have a clue why. Just as the two boys reached the car, their mother screamed. Gasping for breath, Mark turned around. That's what they saw. Lion, James yelped. The lion flattened her ears. Get into the car, Dad cried. Yanked open the car door, pushed Mark and James inside. He and Mom leaped in the front seat, slammed the door shut. Engaged the locks just in case. Everyone stared through the window as the lion stalked closer. Her giant paw struck the soccer ball. Mark gulped. Not 2 minutes ago, he'd been right there. She seemed to study him for a long moment, as if deciding whether the car would make a good lunch. Then she turned and slipped into the grass, tail twitching as she disappeared. The car was completely silent. Mark listened to the rapid beat of his own heart. His whole body trembled. That lion was hunting you, Dad said finally in a shaky voice. If you'd run up to the grass to get your ball, she would have attacked you. Did you yell for me to run? Mark asked Dad. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. We couldn't get the jar of peanut butter open, Mom said sheepishly. I'm so sorry, we were distracted. Mark told them about the voice that shouted in warning. So loud, so close, it made his ears ring. Was it God who spoke to Mark, James asked? The same way God told the lions not to eat Daniel? Mom nodded. Tears gathered in her eyes. So do you remember our Bible verse this week? The Song of Habakkuk, Mark said, the mighty power of God. We do indeed serve a powerful and mighty God, Dad said. The same God who shut the lion's mouth to protect Daniel is the same God who created the entire universe with the power of his word alone. Wiped a tear from his eye. He's the same God who spoke out of thin air and warned you, saving your life. Mark was awestruck, overwhelmed with thankfulness to the awesome God he'd served. We should pray, he whispered. They sat in the car for a long time, heads bowed, as they prayed. So it's important to remember that even if parents or those around you that are watching out for you are distracted, God is still watching out for you. And even as adults, still watches out for us, because we adults do some stupid things. Just saying. So, you guys can go back to your seats.
The offering today is for it says the church budget. It says local, I don't know. Anyway, during the retreat by Japan from the Philippines during World War II, one Japanese soldier named Hiro Onoda received an assignment. He was to stay behind at his post until the commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, relieved him of his duty. On the day of the major's departure, he made a promise, stay here until I come back and relieve you of your duties. Whatever happens, we will come back for you. As an intelligence officer, Onoda had learned the art of blending into the environment and sustaining himself off the land. The war ended in 1945, but for 29 years he stood by his post. At last, the emperor learned that the lieutenant was still on the island. He sent Onoda's former commanding officer with a letter from the emperor telling him he was free to go on March 7, 1974. The major arrived at last, and Onada could leave for home. To all Christians, our commanding officer Jesus gave orders before he left. He said, "But that which ye have already, hold fast till I come." Revelations 2:25. Are you holding and maintaining your post until he comes? As Christians, we are to work for the Lord and help support Christ's ministries through our tithes and offerings. We are to do all we can for our Master till he comes again and relieves us of our earthly post. As we give to the local church budget, let us hold fast till he comes. Would our deacons or deaconesses come forward? Our scripture today comes from Matthew 1:5 and 6. It says, Solomon and Rahab were the parents of Boaz. Boaz and Ruth were the parents of Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. This makes 14 generations from Abraham to David. David and Bathsheba were the parents of Solomon, Bathsheba having been the wife of Uriah, who was killed in battle. Our speaker today is Shawn.
No problem. Woohoo! We got juice. Sweet. All right. Well, today we are going to, I abbreviated it for the bulletin because, well, you only got so much space on the line. So I abbreviated it for this week, but it's actually 2 links in an eternal chain, part 1. The interesting thing about the genealogy of Christ in Matthew is that it's geared on where it includes women. The one in Luke does not. What's interesting is that there are 4 women, and I'm going to cover 2 of them. 1 today, 1 in December. Now, I'm not going to tell you who I'm going to talk about in December. So now you have to find the other 3 in that genealogy, study up on them, and hopefully be ready for December. So let's open with a word of prayer. Gracious Father in heaven, today as we open your word and we talk about Rahab and we talk about what she means to not only the spies, not only to Jericho, but also to the eternal plan of salvation, and what it means to our lives, and how we can incorporate a lot of what characteristics she developed into our own lives, because we all want to come home, and we want it to be yesterday. Guide and keep us today. Let your words flow from me. In your name, amen. So, anybody knows about the Rahab story. Everybody's heard of it. But it's interesting is what makes Rahab so special that she's included in the genealogy of Christ. It's a pretty special list when you think about it. 4 women, and she's one of them. I don't think it was her hummus that she brought to potluck. I don't think that was it. I definitely don't think she tithed a lot because, well, she lived in Jericho. And I don't think it was her winning personality. Instead, her story has a very dark past, but a very bright ending. And it's interesting when you look at Rahab and her story, it was not one that you would normally, most people just gloss over it. I mean, you read about it, you hear about the walls of Jericho, we've all sang the song. But we don't really talk about Rahab as much as I believe we should. So, what drove Rahab? To be honest, it was the Israelites. Without knowing it, for 40 years while these stiff-necked, whining, griping, unmotivated, lack of wanting to do what God asked them to do people, wandering for 40 years in the desert, were evangelizing without even realizing it. Okay? So basically, I am assuming at some point people had heard stories of the miracles that God had done for these Israelites, because time and again, God looked out for them. God took care of them when they truly didn't deserve it. Sounds a little familiar. So imagine if you're Rahab. She's in Jericho. She doesn't really have a profession that you want to bring home to mother. It's not something that really would go over well at Thanksgiving dinner. This is Rahab. She's So there are professions in life that are of ill repute. And the thing is some theologians disagree with what she was or what she wasn't. But if you look at the New Testament and you look at the meaning of the word, which is called zana in Hebrew, she was a harlot. Plain and simple. That's what she was. That was her profession. So the question is, why did God single her out? Out of all the people in Jericho, out of all the people in all the lands that the Israelites were around during that 40 years, why her? What about her made this story so special? So first of all, we're going to discuss who she was, what she did, why she was well known within the city. We're also going to discuss the city, what made it so important and why it was so integral to God's plan. And we're also going to talk about who she became and why it's important for us to draw from her life. So Jericho, everybody knows it, big, huge walls. Big, huge walls. However, idol worship, loose morals, but it was also a major trade center because it was close to the river. And it was actually built, originally, wasn't as tall as it was when it was brought down, but it was basically built by Noah's son Ham's descendants. I had to get to which one it was. So, the Amorites and the Canaanites were the ones who had basically built this up. They were surrounding this area, and these people had built Jericho. And it was a city that was well known. People came in, people came out, trade was huge. And so Rahab knew a lot of these people. And so these traders and these caravans would come through, and they would tell stories about these Israelites, about these people out there that are just wandering around. Not a real goal or purpose in life. They're just wandering around. So that's what they're doing. So in Jericho, there's a chance for people to share the story of God without even realizing it. To know, why are they being taken care of, but yet they're out in the desert. So, the walls of Jericho, this is kind of an interesting little fact. 6 foot thick. Last time I checked, that's a little overdoing it on the code. But 6 foot thick, 46 feet tall. Now, the last time I checked, technology at that time wasn't to the point where it is today, where you could bring in a wrecking ball and just take it out. Back then, there was only one thing that was going to take that down. Supernatural. That's it. There was nothing on this earth that was going to bring that down, except supernatural, which is what God ended up doing. A few years back, some archaeologists were digging in the city. They've been digging out Jericho for quite a while now, and they actually found the part of the wall that is still intact to this day, where Rahab was. Still standing there like a sore thumb, still tall as ever, still there. God works in mysterious ways when he does things like this. It's so awesome to know that even after these centuries of this occurring, because this was way back, this was pre-David, thing is still standing. So, Rahab herself, her name means, according to the Hebrew dictionary, is blusterer. It's used to indicate rage, fierceness, insolence and pride. She was a very proud woman. But it was interesting is that she lived in a city that did not lend itself to the worship of Yahweh. She was in a city that led her into a lifestyle that, while it afforded her a reasonable income, she also had an apartment on the city walls. And in real estate, anybody knows this who's bought a house, it's all about location, location, location. The better the property, the more expensive it is. Now, I would assume the wall being where it is, that in that city would be considered high-end, very expensive. Because you get to view everything. You get to see, you're 46 feet up in the air. Because her apartment was pretty much almost to the top. Because her roof was pretty much right below the parapets, where the sentries would wander back and forth. So she's got a view that most people would pay millions and billions for today. But it's interesting. God got her that apartment without her even realizing it. because it was such a key to the whole story. Having that there, being that tall up, was necessary for the story of the salvation of the two spies and the salvation of Rahab and her family. So when Rahab is in Jericho, she talks to the caravans, she talks to these people. She hears these stories, these fantastic stories, food dropping from heaven, water coming out of rocks. It's like, really? Enough of it sinks into her that she thinks, maybe this is real. Maybe there's something better out there, and maybe what I'm doing may not be right. And as time went on and she met these spies, she knew that they were wanted men because she'd heard the rumors, she'd heard the little whispers in town. So she knew that they were being hunted. So she had to think fast. She's like, okay, these guys are part of the group that's being taken care of in the desert. These guys are the side I want to be on, because if they're surviving for all this time out in the desert, I'd rather be there. I'd rather be on that side. So she made a decision. She decided to lie to the king. Usually not a good idea. Usually doesn't end very well if you're found out. Then she hid them on the roof under some flax seeds or whatever they were. I don't remember what the tree was. But it's interesting is that she actually made them promise to save her and her family in order for her to get them out of the city. So she basically used lies, deceit, and guile to get what she wanted. Now, normally, that wouldn't put you on God's good list. Sorry, but it's not going to, no matter what they think. But God uses the bad sometimes for the good. And we know that in this story because of what ends up happening. So, Rahab's sitting in her apartment. She's got her family. She hears the Israelites walking around. Day one goes by. Nothing happens. No sound, no noise, just marching. That's all she hears. A couple days go by, still the same thing. Everybody hears it. Now, Rahab had put her lot with God. So she's probably okay with this. But I'm imagining people in Jericho, not the soldiers, not the king, but I'm imagining the normal folks that are just in and around town, and they're seeing this. They've got to be a little nervous. They've got to be thinking, this can't end well, because these guys are marching around this wall that supposedly can't come down, but yet they're doing it. They're not making a noise. Nothing. So by day 6, day 7, by now the tension's pretty high. It's pretty palpable. So here it is, day 7. All of a sudden, everything stops. All of a sudden, loud shout. The trumpets. Everything. Rahab's sitting in her apartment. She's got her entire family. She's got that cord sticking out the window. Scarlet cord sticking out the window by itself, just out there. I'm sure people walked by and probably maybe looked and saw it, maybe not. But she's sitting there, and all of a sudden she feels the rumble. She feels the ground shake underneath her. She's got at least 30 to 40 feet underneath her of wall that is just shaking violently at the hands of God. And she's probably sitting there, not a care in the world, because she knows whose side she took. She knows that God will protect her based on the promise. So all of a sudden the walls come down. Joshua sends the 2 spies to go retrieve Rahab and her family. And there, sticking out like a sore thumb, is this piece of wall. Big piece of wall. 46 feet tall, window up there. Piece of cord hanging down. That's it. They rescue her and her family. She's now part of the Israelites. She goes with them. But is that the end of the story? No. Here's where it gets fun. This is where the miracle of God shows its face, and it's beautiful. So one of those spies, his name was Salmon, not the fish, guy named Salmon. His father was the chieftain of the tribe of Judah. Pretty high ranking in terms of Israel tribes. Judah was pretty high up there. The Bible doesn't talk much about the courtship, nor should it, because it's not as important to this as what happens next. Eventually, Salmon basically redeems Rahab from her life. She now is considered, according to the New Testament, to be righteous. It's found in James. So the interesting thing is now you've gone from being a low person on the social status, one who doesn't have regarded very well, to someone who's married to someone who's high up in the tribes. So here's where it gets fun. They have a son, some guy named Boaz. Doesn't mean much in the Bible, I don't think, except for the greatest love story ever written. He's sitting around night after night with his parents, listening to the story of redemption from his mother. A few years later, God gives him a chance to redeem somebody else. He uses a lot of the same techniques his mother did. He basically kind of hoodwinked his relative to giving up his right to the property, his right to Ruth, in order to redeem her. Just like Salmon did with his mother. So, it's interesting that God took something like the lifestyle of Rahab and took it and just molded it, shaped it. And we get the greatest love story. And then a couple generations go by and some little guy, I don't know, some little shepherd boy named David, I don't know, he comes along. So think about that. Your great-grandmother was rescued from Jericho. Imagine the stories around that fireplace at night. So it's interesting that God can take something so, what seems simple, and turn it into something beautiful. So then the question becomes, how does it help us to understand? In the Bible, the Lord used many weak, many immorals, many people who had just not a good reputation. He took them, he used them. He took these people's lives, he transformed them. What's interesting about it is, it didn't matter to God, because ultimately what mattered was the kingdom. Because he wants everybody there, and he can take anything from Rahab to Hosea's wife on down, and he can just take it, turn it into something beautiful. And it's interesting, when you look at the list, and I want you to study this list between now and December. Study the genealogy of Christ. Study those individuals, because there's a lot of shockers in there. A lot of shockers. People that you would never even associate to be in the lineage of Christ. But each of us has a story. We each have our own testimony for God. Our own story of redemption. As we were talking about in Sabbath school this morning, and I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to ruin my sermon. We have a come to Jesus moment in our lives. We all have one. At some point in our past, or in our future, depending on your age, we're going to have a come to Jesus moment. It's enough to humble us. It's enough to bring us to our knees, to pray for forgiveness, to say, yeah, I kind of messed up. And I need to get right with God. Because he wants no one lost. No one. That not one be lost. He wants everybody in the kingdom. Rahab was a story of faith in action. True faith in action. We've heard the story of people like Desmond Doss, who put his faith into action in the military. We've heard stories in the Bible. There's stories throughout history where faith was put to the test. And time and again, God's side won out. I'd rather be on his side than anybody else's, to be honest. But the interesting thing is, we're not always called to plant the seed and sow it. We're not called to reap it all the time. We are each called to an individual part of the chain. What we say, what we do, it may not affect us personally at that point, but people are watching, people are listening. What you say, what you do, can affect somebody, quite possibly for eternity. So we have to think clearly and understand that if we are to be children of God, we need to focus on what his will is. What does he want us to do? What does he want us to say? Does he want us to sit there like the Israelites for 40 years, whine, gripe, complain? I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have this. That's what the world is today. It's always about more and more and more. I want. I don't have this. Ryan's got a better tractor than I do. He's actually he's got a tractor. I don't have a tractor. So, a little jealous. Sorry. I like a tractor. But that's the point. We, as humans, want what we want, but sometimes it's not what we need. That's what God is trying to teach us through Rahab. We need to put our faith into action because God will reward us. Because you think about that. He took Rahab, this woman who basically was not someone you would be normally associated with. It's similar to Mary Magdalene in the New Testament, when they used her as a tool to try to test Christ because she was a woman of loose morals, and they thought that was the best way to do it. But God took her side, and she joined his side. So here's the thing. We talked about this. Dying daily, dying minute by minute to self. We have to bury self, because if we don't, our faith means nothing, our actions mean nothing. Because if we are not with God, then we are against him. There is no lukewarm, there is no sitting on the fence. We either are for him or we're not. And if you've chosen to not be with him, you've already chosen. We've all heard the story of the faith of a mustard seed. Rahab truly was the faith of a mustard seed. A woman who had absolutely no background in faith in God took the word of two men that she was going to be saved. No matter what happened to the wall, no matter what happened to the city, her and her family would be safe. She literally hung her entire faith on that cord hanging from the window. That is the faith of a mustard seed. Knowing and believing in your heart of hearts that God's there for you no matter what you do. We're going to close with a song, 68, I think it is, for showing us that our faith, small as it may be, can reap eternal rewards. May what we do for you bring joy to the kingdom, and may it bring and hasten your soon return. We look forward to being caught up with you. One way or another, we want to be on that roll call when you call us home. May each of us be blessed as we go through the Sabbath day. May each of us have a wonderful week, and may each of us sow the seeds for the kingdom. In your name we ask. Amen.